Hello and welcome to Moneylife News and Views. Another union budget has come and gone. Now, union budgets are made out to be some kind of a mega event by the media, especially the business media. But each one is as memorable or as forgettable as the other one. Every year before the budget, industry associations send long memorandums on what they wanted from the budget. Businessmen publicize their wish lists, and in the financial sector, the experts, that is the analysts, fund managers, and various other people connected, hope that the government would unleash what they call more reforms. Since the BJP government came to power with a thundering majority for the second time, many thought that this year's budget would be path-breaking. On the budget day, as usual, we get deeply involved in trying to decipher what the finance minister has actually offered in terms of new proposals, ideas, and so on. But to what end? Just take a look at what this time the people in the financial markets expected and what they actually got. Expectations range from a repeal of long-term capital gains tax to a bailout package for the tottering, over-leveraged finance companies to tweaking of income tax slabs and to greater privatization. What we got instead was a regressive idea such as a tax on buyback and forced liquidation of promoter holding to be brought down from 75% to 65%, which has been in the works for decades. Many parts of this year's budget speech had little to do with the budget itself. They were policy announcements and motherhood statements. For instance, the finance minister announced a 70,000 crore capital infusion. Remember, the previous finance minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, announced the mega 2.11 lakh crore bank recapitalization, which is also infusion of capital into public sector banks, sometime in October 2017, which is far away from any budget. And some parts of the FM's budget speech was actually merely ideas. They were not actual proposals. Forcing promoters of listed companies to sell down their shares to 65% or less is neither a spending item nor a resource-raising proposal. In fact, it's not even a proposal of any kind. It later turned out that it's merely a suggestion to the Securities of Exchange Board of India to implement. The worst thing is, this idea goes back to 2006 when the SEBI chairman had given a very strict rule and a deadline for all publicly listed companies to bring down their shareholding to at least 75%. But despite SEBI giving a firm date, those deadlines have come and gone. There were multiple deadlines subsequently as well. Now, while the government has not bothered to bring down the stakes of its own companies, that is government companies below 75%, this time we are already doing loud thinking in a budget speech to bring it down to 65% for everybody. More such ideas that have nothing to do with the budget include a new education policy, public-private partnerships for faster development of freight services, restructuring of national highways, and for creation of national highways grid and using rivers for cargo transport. Now, using rivers for cargo transport is something that I have heard from 1985 onwards, and I'm sure there have been planning commission reports which go back another 20 years or 30 years before. And then there is a 100 lakh crore investment for the infrastructure sector over the next 5 years. Now, after throwing this huge number, the finance minister said an expert committee would be set up to recommend the structure and flow of funds through development financial institutions. But development financial institutions don't exist anymore. Which institutions would these be? Indian DFIs have been phased out. This is like earlier IDBI and ICICI and IFCI, and they are now banks. Except for specific changes in tax provisions, usually tax increases, there rarely ever any tax reduction. Poring over budget pronouncements is absolutely meaningless. After all, there will be too many deviations from what was said in the budget and too many new policy initiatives announced later which are not even in the budget. Now, also with Mr. Modi as a Prime Minister, it is he who plans, controls and executes various programs, although not always for the best results. After the budget, with his customary hyperbole, the Prime Minister announced that the budget would make the nation samruddh, that is prosperous, and the people samarth, which is able. A combative politician who is very sensitive to criticism, he slammed those criticizing the budget as professional pessimists. In effect, he dismissed us with a characteristic soundbite, and he will now go on to do what he wishes. That is really the key. We have to pay attention to what the regime does and not what it says. Every union budget is an exercise in hiding bad government finances in various ways. This government too has done the same. In fact, it's so brazen that the FM simply did not bother to mention the word fiscal deficit, which is something that economists discuss ad nauseum. In fact, subsequently, somebody pointed out that some 2 lakh crore figure is actually missing from the budget accounting. The other objective of budget, which is probably the most important objective, is to discuss how much more money the government will raise next year. This takes the form of extortive taxes on people, and these taxes affect the poor the most, not exactly the rich, and on the most productive part of system, which is the enterprises. So they affect two of the most, so they affect the poor people as well as the businessmen, and especially the small enterprises. Such relentless resource grabbing is needed by the government. For what? For salaries and interest on borrowings. Now, taxes also allow politicians to distribute money to their pet schemes, which they then use to win votes and elections. And a lot of that money is actually wasted. No budget has so far addressed this crucial issue, the huge amount of money that the government wastes, which is reflected in abysmal productivity of capital, as economists like to call it. Improving that alone would be a major game changer, and we don't need to go through budgets to do that. But the government's tight lock on business, banks, education, even essential services like transportation and large parts of infrastructure and healthcare is destroying capital year after year after year. And that capital is our capital, which we are putting into the government finances through taxes. This is why more and more resources have to be extracted from us. This means that the consumer and the businesses have less money to spend, which could actually, if they did spend, could actually generate growth and create jobs. We ought to see this continuous extortion and start protesting against it. We ought to see through this continuous extortion and start protesting against it in some time. And yet, year after year, the smartest people accept this inefficient structure as a given, which is the elephant in the room. We ought to see through this extortion and start protesting about it sometime. And yet, year after year, the smartest people accept this inefficient structure as given and just keep discussing the budget details. And then they expect significant changes to come about through mere tinkering. It is silly of us to expect anything different from one budget and another. There is a saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And here we are fooling us over and over again. Thanks for watching.